Hi there. This is going to be data storytelling for finance professionals. My name is Kelsey Helstrom. I have been in data storytelling for about 7 or 8 years. I mainly work in Power BI right now, and other kind of BI tools. And one of my main goals is how do we take our data, move it to insights, and then craft a recommendation that's really easy to understand, but also that people care about, right? We have just so much data coming at us in outside of work, in work, just in our entire lives that we need a way that people will remember, but also care about what we're saying. So, over the next hour, we are going to transform how you communicate financial analysis. That is our goal. You'll learn why the best financial models fail without compelling narratives, and how to structure your presentation so stakeholders not only understand your analysis, but they'll act on it. And this isn't about making prettier charts. We're going to touch on that, of course, but this isn't necessarily here's what colors to use and here's how to make your deck really pretty. It's going to be a lot more about driving better business decisions through clear communication, but also using charts to help that, right? So let's dive in. We're gonna start with why this matters. If you're taking this course, I'm assuming that you kind of have an idea of why this matters, but I'm gonna tell you anyway, right? So as I said, we just as people in modern day are drowning in data, but I think especially when you're in finance, you're drowning with just so many numbers, and you're always starving for insight, right? I cannot count the number of times that somebody has just given me a huge Excel file and been like, here you go. You know, this is what this means. And I have to go through it and I have to understand and digest and then act on it. Where really we should be working towards, I have all this data if you do need it, but here's the insights I pulled from it, right? Um, and at the same time, you can build like the most sophisticated financial model in the world. You can be incredibly smart and wonderful in the financial analysis world. But if your stakeholders don't understand it, they're not going to act on it. And that really means that the analysis has failed. Does anyone remember Netflix in 2011? Their CFO had clear data that streaming was the future. And as we know right now, streaming has been the future. But the narrative was really poorly told. When they announced this, their stock dropped 77% because all of their investors did not understand why this was the future, why they would ever want to stream something, didn't understand the narrative whatsoever. And so, hindsight 2020, always like years later, looking at now, the same data vindicated that decision. We can see that everybody's moved to streaming, but that initial storytelling by the CFO really cost them billions in market cap. Your challenge is always going to be unique. You're going to face really skeptical audiences, trained to question assumptions. You have regulatory constraints, time pressure. But this is where communication, if it's poor, it can derail careers. If it's good, it can make your career. It can make your business, which for most of us, we really want. Oops, wrong way. So, what makes finance storytelling unique? We really face four key constraints. So, your audience is always going to be skeptical and analytically trained. When you're in finance, you are trained to question every assumption, right? We want to make sure everything ties out. We want to make sure that every little piece of data coming in makes sense, which we'll also talk about can be an opportunity. Your other constraint is regulatory and accuracy requirements. That's really going to limit your creative liberty. Depending on what industry you're in, how big your company is, things like that, you might have different regulatory requirements, but at the end of the day, finance has many more accuracy requirements than maybe marketing or sales. Um, you're probably always going to be under some type of time pressure, even if you're in the most well-managed organization, you're going to have those 15-minute board presentations or a 60-minute earnings call, or maybe your C-suite can only give you 5 minutes and you gotta get a whole bunch of stuff out. And fourth, it's a high stakes department. Finance is everything, and your communication can move markets, it can kill deals, it impacts careers. It's usually pretty high stakes. The good news is that most of these constraints can also be your opportunities, right? Data-driven culture always respects evidence. If you can give strong evidence, especially database evidence, usually your culture is going to say, okay, that makes sense. And they're willing to work with you or move with you. Clear financial metrics enable really an objective comparison. Those metrics that we say we want to hit this target, and it's really, did we hit it or did we not? There's not a lot of times that we get to say, well, we would have hit it if we did, XYZ. It's usually pretty clear what we need to do to make money, to have revenue go up, right? So those can really work in your favor. Also, numbers are a universal language. It transcends departments, industries. It's always going to be an objective point for you to present on. And the key to really learning to harness those advantages is to have really strong financial literacy, but also to, be able to present in a way that really gets everyone on your side in that data-driven culture with those clear metrics and with those objective numbers. And it is possible. I know it sounds a little hard, but it's possible. So I'm going to go through a 3-act structure. And this is kind of my way of explaining how we present stories. If you think of a book, a play, a movie, they might have a few more acts than 3, but they have a general, there's the setup, all the context, there's some type of conflict or insight, and then there's a resolution. If we think of Cinderella, we have all the context of her life, that she lives with her 2 stepsisters and her mother's mean to her, makes her be the maid. We're given all this context of kind of how she's grown up and that she needs to get out, right? We have the conflict that she wants to go to the ball, but she doesn't have anything to wear. She doesn't have any way to get there. She has to be home by midnight. She loses her shoe. We have the whole conflict there. And then the resolution that, happily ever after. That was a really high level of how Cinderella works, but it still works with our structure. So Act 1, we are going to establish the business questions and why it matters, right? So we're not just going to say revenue was up 8%, because I know that a lot of times we want to give a positive spin, right? We never want to say we're doing really poorly, yay. But maybe revenue needed to be up 10% for us to hit our goals, or maybe revenue up by 8% is good. Revenue was up 8% by how long? Year to date, the past month? Like, we're not really giving any context to what we're saying. Instead, we can say something like, our growth rate has halved in 2 quarters. If this continues, we'll miss our annual target by $15 million. Here's what the data reveals about why this is happening, right? So we're giving data on years. So this is going to be in the past 2 quarters. We're saying that, here's what will happen if this continues. We're giving significant more context to why we're presenting on this. And then we're going to say, hey, we have data, we have evidence as to why. That's going to move us to the conflict or maybe the insight. And this is where you're going to present your analysis and reveal maybe the unexpected finding, something that's interesting, doesn't have to be fully unexpected. But this is where you show that maybe 60% of margin decline came from a single new customer segment, not broad operational issues. And this is where maybe the unexpected finding is you might be thinking, oh, this is just an operational issue. We need to go call in our COO and see what's going on, right? This is where you can kind of give that insight to, it's actually from this new customer segment. or it's actually from this one item, or tariffs hit this part of the market really hard. It gives full insight to like a 360 view of your business. And then Act 3 is going to be the resolution, the recommendation. You're going to want to provide clear, quantified, actionable recommendations. Here's the formula I would recommend. If we take blank action, we can expect blank outcome within blank time frame. So this gives a really good, almost like mic drop moment at the end